And this brings me around to like what we were originally going to talk about today, which is the Democrats' capitulation on the shutdown deal, and the fact that like once again, like a handful of Democratic politicians with the full support of Chuck Schumer. I mean, like at a time when like coming off an election, which was like dealt the Democrats their strongest hand that they've had in years. And there was some feeling of momentum going forward because, in fact, according to polls, the public was overwhelmingly blaming Donald Trump for the shutdown. And the fact that they gave it up for nothing, for not even a bag of peanuts, is like what it's the old thing that we've always noticed is that like these handful of very elderly Democrats who are not facing re-election get to occupy the position of sin eater for the entire Democratic Party. That like they get to be the blame. They get to like take on the role of being like the hated capitulators as cover for the rest of the party and its actual agenda. And I think what's going on here is like you can look at it and to like. One, there's been reporting that like a lot of them were under very heavy pressure from their donors in the airline industry, which was looking down a holiday season in which fully 10% of American airspace was just simply shut down because of the lack of air traffic controllers. Can you imagine what that would have been like? And obviously that would give the Democrats even more leverage over Donald Trump as this shutdown gets immeasurably more unpopular and painful to the American people. Like, can you imagine what the holidays would be like? I mean, what they're going to be like already, but like under this context.
Yeah, I mean, that is the thing. I would not say that American air travel is saved by any means.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think the writing was on the wall as soon as it became a possibility, perhaps, that they might nuke the filibuster.
That's the real thing that's going on here. That's it.
That was unacceptable. That was unacceptable for Schumer, the Democrats. I mean, it's also I have seen like Simone Sanders and the usual suspects saying, well, Schumer voted no. And
that's irrelevant. It's that he gave permission to his coalition to vote yes.
Taking that on face value, if Schumer voted no and he wanted everyone in his caucus to vote no, then he has no business leading the fucking
Exactly.
caucus.
That's your job as Senate Majority Leader, is to enforce discipline on votes like that.
Yeah. So either he wanted to capitulate or he didn't, and he's fucking incompetent.
And I go back to like the self-appointed like cast members who become the sin eater, become like the Judas goat for the Democratic Party. I mean, Matt called this back in 2020 about Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. Is that like they weren't the only ones protecting the filibuster? They were just the ones that were willing to be useful in that regard. And here's the thing, like you like. I know it's like, oh, like you don't know, like the this is how the Senate functions, and it couldn't function without the filibuster, and like this is what protects us from Donald Trump doing really awful things. No, like what if they got like the filibuster should be done away with, but the thing is, the second it is done away with, then the Democratic Party will face an existential threat to them, which is that they will be required to pass legislation that the people who vote for them want them to do and elect them to do, and the filibuster is the ultimate like pressure valve release to prevent that from ever happening. And so that is why, like, because if the shutdown had continued, Donald Trump was promising to do away with the filibuster, and they cannot allow that to happen, even though it is used exclusively against the interests of, I don't know, civil rights or progressive legislation or anything good happening in this country's political system.
That is just too high of a price for them. The idea that during the next Democratic administration that they would have to pass card check. No, that's unacceptable.
Or a public option or something like that.
Right. The idea that the next Joe Biden, who says, well, I'm not for Medicare for all, but I support a public option, would actually have to try and deliver that.
Yeah. And like, and there's another aspect to this because, like, obviously, like, this happened right after the elections on Tuesday, which, like, everyone regarded as basically a bloodbath for Republicans nationally and, like, an indicator of where the midterms are going to go next year. And there was this feeling of, like, for the first time, the Democrats had some momentum and they had the Republican Party on their back foot because, like, in fact, they were not being blamed for the government shutdown. And people, like, the public was mad at Donald Trump for it, even though it was the technically them who shut the government down. But the thing is, I talked to Catherine about this, and I like, you can read into this what you want, But like, I think the results of Tuesday's election were one of the reasons that they capitulated so quickly. Because I don't think that they want to have like I said, a precedent set where they have the popular will at their back and that they have the momentum to do what they want. And I think, honestly, some of it was also just punishment for Zoran getting across the finish line. Like, I mean, that's the way I'm looking at it.
I think like, really since 2020, even when Biden's margin in 2020 was not quite what they expected, they had already started this narrative of like the groups. And in the mind of like, you know, the average party functionary, a repeat of a Trump one style, like emboldened resistance, however you want to term it, that is the easiest on-ramp for like the hated groups to have any influence in the party, and they do not want that. I don't know how much like Zoran's victory had, how much impact it had with this specifically, but I do think that like, yeah, they are terrified of running back 2018 with like a base that now, after having done like the Joe Biden experiment, is not going for that shit again.
And like, in light of everything we talked about to open up this show, their opposition, the president that they are opposed to, is more or less openly, as I said, an obese sex criminal who is like, was elected on the promise that he was going to root out the elite sex criminals at the height of American power. Only, oh, surprise, surprise, turns out he's the biggest one there is. And he is like as implicated by this shit as anyone.
Right. No one is more invested in the idea of his continued viability than Schumer and Jeffries and everyone else who relies on that party for their paycheck.